Welcome back, fellow half-ass viewers. If you're new here, welcome to the struggle. And if you're a returning viewer, welcome back to the chaos. In our last episode, we had a catastrophe when our freshly finished V8 toppled on its engine stand and hit the concrete. Hard. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but man oh man, what a setback. We had to take much of the engine apart just to repair the obvious damage, and even after inspecting it as thoroughly as we could, there was really no way to know for sure if it had sustained internal damage. With only one real way to find out, we put it all together and pressed on. So now we're diving into prepping the engine bay and refurbishing the entire front end. Stay with us as we continue the Riviera Revival saga. So we're underneath the car again. We're taking apart the suspension. I wanted to show you a couple of things here. There's a lot of grease all over the place. I've scraped off a lot of it already. Probably should have shown that to you before I did that. But if you can see under here, top boot of the ball joint, the protective boot is ripped. It's torn open, and that's not a good thing. So we'll be changing this ball joint. Probably change the bottom ball joint as well, because that one looks like it's been ripped as well. Grease everywhere is a telltale sign that the boot has been compromised, and who knows what all's in there. Rainwater gets in there, dirt, grit, grime, and that's just death for ball joints. So something to look for when you're doing any kind of work on a car. If those are ripped, you got a little bit of work ahead of you. Should be changing that out. So here we are pulling out the torque converter from the transmission. Give us a little bit more room. And we're jacking up or supporting the transmission on some jack stands. So we're disconnecting the brakes here. Gonna take the lines off, gonna take off the calipers. Basically the whole front end is gonna come apart. So we wanna make sure we do this right and get access to everything we need to get to. So the calipers off. Now we're taking the dust shield for the wheel bearing off. Gonna pull the cotter pin out. Little trick there, needle nose and hammer always works pretty good. And pulling off the spindle nut, backing off the rotor a little bit, get the bearing out, wipe all that stuff off. Now this car has been updated or retrofitted in the past with disc brakes in the front. I don't know who the manufacturer is. Might be TA, I'm not entirely sure. But they work pretty good. There are some technical difficulties or issues with these things, which we'll describe in a later video. But it's always good having disc brakes on an old car like this. How many of you have had old cars with drum brakes in the front? I had an old 68 Caddy that had drum brakes, and I could never get those things synchronized. In other words, one would pull harder than the other, no matter what I did. Yeah, disc brakes are better. So we are taking off these big giant rods, which basically tie the lower control arms to the front of the frame. This is in the days when lower control arms were just pretty much a straight arm. They were not triangular in shape like upper control arms were. So they needed this support to keep the control arm from shifting forward and backward under loads, acceleration and braking. It's very difficult to get these things off, and in retrospect, we should have probably not taken off the mounting hardware here at the control arm. We should have taken the front mounting strut off first, but you live and learn, right? Got it off, and now we're getting the shocks out. Got to get the lower bolt for the shock out. Not too hard in this case. The shocks didn't seem that old. That can be a real chore. So now we're loosening the lower ball joint nut. Thanks to a tip from a viewer, a half-ass viewer, recommended loosening the nut a few turns and letting the spring of the control arm there do the work. Smack on that knuckle on the spindle a few times, and sure enough, that thing comes right out. You don't need a pickle fork, which is way better. So here we used our floor jack, helped us lower that control arm, because folks, you got to be really careful with these springs. There's an enormous amount of energy in there, and they can kill you if you're not careful. So please be careful. If that thing's got any kind of sprung weight on it, it's a dangerous thing. So now that the spring is out, we're taking off the upper control arms, the bolts that attach the A control arm to the frame. We're going to take those off, rebuild those bushings. Now we're going to take off the lower control arm, replace those bushings as well. because everything is going to get updated in the front end of this car. We want this thing to ride smooth. We want it to track straight. We don't want all sorts of drifting all over the road. So it'll be a beautiful thing. So now we're taking off the upper ball joint. Lots of grease, lots of deterioration. That bump stop there on the control arm obviously is falling apart. It's old, ancient. It's just basically disintegrating. So that's going to have to be replaced as well. So just continuing to work on taking off the upper ball joint. I don't know why I get that wrong all the time. We put the nut back on there on the stud, smack it a few times, and break that tapered ball joint free from the control arm. That ball joint, you can see I'm moving it fairly easily by hand. Shouldn't be that easy to move. It wasn't too bad, but didn't like it. So, we're at this point, we're going to take it apart. Same with these bushings. They're all cracked, dry rotted. They need to be replaced. So, half-ass viewers, got a question for you all. In some of our previous videos, I used a backdrop noise of like a shop, different sounds from a shop, air tools, guns, things like that. Sort of like an ambient sound in the background. Some of you liked it, some of you didn't. I'm trying to understand, should I use them again or should I not? Because sometimes just listening to me babble on, kind of boring. Let us know in the comments, okay? So these particular ball joints were actually tack welded into the control arms, the upper control arms. So we're using an angle grinder or a die grinder to carefully break those or grind those welds away. And now that they're broken away, we can undo that big nut on the bottom side. And we can, well, with the help of a little heat, obviously, we'll be taking that thing off. And then we can get the ball joint out of the control arm. And with a tap, out she comes. So we're grinding up the rest of the welds, and safety glasses, folks, safety glasses, those things go everywhere. So now we're cleaning up, we got the bushings off, we're cleaning up the control arms. I forgot the term for these things, but these are actually arms that bolt to the frame. Again, we're polishing up a little bit more to get the remnants of the welds off of there. We don't want the ball joint to sit on those things, the new ball joints. Now we're cleaning up those monster struts. A lot of rust on these things. So we got our wire wheel going. Be careful again. Got to wear safety glasses. Any of those bristles come flying off that wheel at your eye, that's going to hurt. And it could be permanent damage. So please, safety glasses. So now we're sanding them off a little bit, taking off a little bit more of what the wire wheel could not take off. Getting all the rust off of these things, getting the nooks and crannies clean. It's amazing, isn't it? How many nooks and crannies there are and how many different tools you need to get into these darn things. But we're trying to knock off all the burrs, gouges, anything like that. And here's a before and after comparison. So, you can't get those things looking perfect. They're 60 years old. There's pitting takes place, but you know what? You can make them look as good as you possibly can. So now we're cleaning off one of the spindles. A lot of junk, a lot of crud. Again, from that boot breaking on the ball joint. Years and years of grease and road grime just dripping all over that thing. So now we're setting up our press to get the new bearings, or bushings I should say, pressed onto the control arm spindles here. Took a little bit of rigmarole to get everything set up correctly, but it got there. It got there. So putting in the new bushings again. We had a tool that was meant for this, but it didn't quite fit. But we made it work. It's amazing how many tools you need to do these things right. But here's an old bushing, the old control arm, the lower control arm, looking a little ratty, as you can see. And that ball joint, I mean, take a look at this thing. Look, I'm moving it by my using my fingers. You can't really see it there, but here's a shot underneath where I'm moving it back and forth with my fingers, and that is really loose. That weld there has broken free at some point in the past. And all these areas where there's just a little bit of play, they start adding up, over the entire system. And that's why your car starts drifting here and there, left and right, all over the place. It's just like a noodle. It won't go straight. So all of these bushings really need to be replaced, and that's what we're doing. So cleaning off everything, getting all the crud and grime off of stuff, spray painting them, nice new coat of paint, make things look pretty again. Because actually, when things are clean, you can see if there's a leak much easier than if something is covered in grease and grime. In fact, a lot of factories, world-class factories, paint their shop floors white under all the machines, or actually everywhere. And that way, if the machine starts leaking someplace, you can see it immediately. You can't see if something's leaking if there's crud and grease and grime all over the place. So a clean machine is a lot safer and usable. So here we are, we've got the lower control arm, new bushing in place. It's painted, looks way better. That's going to handle a lot nicer. Notice that all these bushings that we're replacing are stock. They're standard. They're not these high performance things. We don't want that. We don't want this thing to be on rails. We just want a nice soft ride like it was meant to be. So now we're moving on to cleaning up the wheel wells, the frame, all the other components that are still underneath here that you can't remove. And this is quite the job. Again, we are a simple father and son team. We don't have a huge budget. We don't have a fancy shop. It's just our garage, tools that we've accumulated over the years. I film all this stuff on my potato of a phone. I don't have any fancy equipment, nothing like that. So it's just us with whatever money we can put aside. Usually it's my son's money because I'm not allowed to have toys. And we appreciate your patience. It's not a high production thing. As you can tell, it's just an amateur father and son having a good old time trying to get his cars in the best shape we possibly can. So one of the things that you guys can do to help if you're enjoying this kind of stuff is just hit like and hit subscribe. Would you? That would be a huge help for us. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers because it seems when you get to that threshold, things start maybe happening for amateurs like ourselves. So if you wouldn't mind, we'd really appreciate it. It's one small click for you, but a huge boost for us. Much appreciated. Anyway, we are continuing with the cleaning of the frame, every place we can get to. As you see, this is not a frame-off restoration. We're just father and son going about our business in our garages. We don't have rotisseries and cranes and hot tanks and all that kind of stuff. We do the best we can with the tools we got. So cleaning everything we can get to with brushes and solvent. I want to get all the nooks and crannies cleaned out. The car is actually a lot cleaner than I am used to. I have always had old cars, mostly Cadillacs, and I tell you, working underneath those things, it's a mess. I don't care what kind of goggles or safety glasses you put on. Rust and all sorts of garbage falls in your face. Every time you touch something, something falls on you. It's really frustrating. This one's not so bad, but we're going to make it better. So here's the steering gear coming out. The old Saginaw gearbox there needs to be replaced. There's a lot of play in it. So we're continuing with the scraping, just getting all the rust off and starting to remove the wiring harness as we go. The battery tray area was kind of bad. Those typically rust pretty aggressively because of what sits on top of them, right? Battery acid can leak. A lot of corrosion can go on in there. But, after a day of scraping, this is all what came off the bottom of that car. And I'm glad it's gone because it's a mess. We don't want that there. It's going to look very pretty when it's done. But you can see a lot of stuff can accumulate over the years. Just continuing with the cleaning, trying to get all the dust and dirt off as much as we can, all the grease. We want to prep it for some paint. And to do that right, you need to have clean surfaces. So here's a little close-up of some of the areas around the parking lights on the car. The chrome is not in bad shape. It's pitted a little bit, and so are the trim pieces, but we'll sand it as much as we can, as aggressively as we can without making it too bad, and painting it, priming it, and painting it, making it look better. So here I am, taking all the wires out of the thing, making sure that we can get access to the different surfaces to clean them off, using all sorts of different chemicals and solvents, and hosing it all off to make sure that we got all the oils and stuff out of there. And we'll let that dry, and once it's dry, we'll start painting. So it looks pretty clean. Wiring harness is out of the way. It was a long scrubbing day, but it's going to be worthwhile. So we continue with the prep of the individual components. Here are the spindles. We're masking off the axle bearing parts so that we don't get any paint on them. We're going to give those a coat of paint, and we are starting the long, slow process of painting the frame and all the components underneath the hood there. It's the products that we've used. I'll have links in the description for you guys if you want to try those out. If you do use those links, we get a small commission at no cost to you. It does help us out, though. You know, every little bit helps. It's brushes and rollers, just trying to get into every nook and cranny that we can. So the next few minutes of this video is just us painting. So rather than bore you all to death with my monotone voice. Oh, by the way, somebody once commented that I sound like Garfield. What do you all think? Do I sound like Garfield? I didn't think so, but hey, whatever. So rather than listening to me drone on and on, I'm going to default back to the old Shop Sounds soundtrack. So here we are prepping the new steering gearbox. We got to find the center point, make sure that we mark that and indicate that clearly so that when we put it in and mate it up with the steering column, we don't have a crooked wheel. Now we're putting in the lower control arms, the upper control arms. Everything's been painted, refreshed, nice new bushings. It's a beautiful thing. The frame is painted, it's all dry. Wheel wells are painted and dry inside and out. Firewall's been painted. Behind the grill, the radiator, everything. So we're spray painting some of the spots that we couldn't get to with brushes, and whew, I tell you, a lot of overspray. So make sure you cover things up that you don't want any overspray laying on. And again, we'll leave links to the products that we've used in the description below. So if you want to try those out, feel free to click on those links. Now comes the part that we all hate. We are trying to put new front springs into the car. Now that spring compressor you see has been with me since the early 80s. And spoiler alert, it gave out during this last attempt. These are very strong springs. It's a heavy car, so they're strong springs, but this spring compressor, it, poor thing, I really used the hell out of this thing. What we're trying to do is compress the spring enough so that we can get it up in there. And again, be careful, folks. This just terrifies me. I don't like that kind of thing. It a lot of energy in a compressed spring like this. So try to stay clear of it as much as possible. I know that's impossible, but if you can, stay out of the way of the thing when it if it should explode on you, if that spring compressor lets go. So what we don't have on tape is the fact that we went out and bought a new spring compressor and used that. So this is our first effort. My apologies to you all. These videos take a long time to make, and a lot of things have been happening in the meantime between these videos and these takes. You know, life things happen. So it's been a long time since I created the last video. I've lost some of the clips, lost continuity, so my apologies for that, folks. Again, you're dealing with amateurs here, and it shows. So anyway, we got the spring in finally, but we're trying to compress the spring a little bit more to be able to get the ball joint through the lower, the lower ball joint hole in the spindle. And we're having a hard time with that. So that's when we got the new spring compressor. We repeated everything you just saw. We finally got the spring compressed to a height where we could get the nut on and the ball joint, and everything went well after that point. So now we're putting the rest of the components together, new tie rods, new center link, new idler arm, new pitman arm nut. Everything under there is new and replaced. So I believe this thing is going to ride wonderfully when it's done. So we're trying to get the tie rods adjusted to a point where it's good enough to drive down the road to bring it into an alignment shop. So now we're getting the AC compressor out of the way. We're going to carefully put that up on the fender well, protect the fender with a towel, and we're going to tie it to the frame with a nice big thick piece of wire. Now we're getting ready to put the torque converter in. We're lubing up the OD of that torque converter shaft. We don't want to damage the seal in the front of the transmission. You'll see that my son tried to get in from the bottom, but that was a big fat no. Torque converters are extremely heavy, so he decided to sit in the engine compartment and put it in that way. The torque converter has to align perfectly with the transmission front shaft. On this car, there's specific notches that have to line up with each other. You got to spin, jiggle, push the torque converter until it drops fully into the bell housing. You'll feel it move further back into place with a satisfying thunk. If it's not fully seated, you can cause some severe damage. So now we're getting the engine ready, the engine that has been cursed, the engine that has seen all sorts of trials and tribulations. Watch our previous videos and you'll see what we're talking about. It's been an unbelievable road to get to this point. So we're taking the engine stand mount off and we're going to put the flex plate on it, going to mount that up, use some Loctite on the threads. We don't want those things coming loose because it's very hard to get to these bolts once everything's in place. Torque them down with an impact. We couldn't find the right torque specs, but we just decided to smoke them down because we don't want them going anywhere. What we're doing now is using a tape measure to measure the distance between the back of the engine, where the bell housing mounts up to the pads where the torque converter mounts to on the flex plate. We want to be absolutely certain we got that torque converter seated correctly, because one of my nightmares from my younger days was on my 68 Cadillac. I didn't understand this, and I didn't have the torque converter seated correctly. And I used bolts to try to pull the bell housing to the engine, and I cracked the bell housing. I want to be sure we got that torque converter seated correctly. And it's a good thing we checked, because when we double checked, the torque converter was not seated fully. So we jiggled some more, we spun some more, we jiggled and jiggled and jiggled until we finally made sure we could feel we got those notches lined up, and in it went. Here's a shot of the beautifully refurbished engine bay, freshly painted, spotless, and with every suspension component completely redone. Getting this engine to where it is today has been an absolute journey of trials and tribulations. If you want to see the crazy obstacles we had to overcome to get here, definitely check out our previous videos. You'll be amazed. Make sure to stick around for the next episode because we're refreshing the wiring and finally dropping the engine back in with all the accessories. Then comes the moment of truth. Will it fire up or grenade itself on the very first turn? If you're enjoying our videos, please throw us a like and do subscribe so you don't miss it. You know you want to see what happens. Thanks so much for watching, everybody.